Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of David Walker, who I spoke to very, very recently to find out more about life, love and poetry and all the other groovy stuff. Was in a Manchester-based indie band in the late 80s and very early 90s called the Exuberants, who brought out one album, had a couple of singles, and then three of the members went on to form a band called Brassy, so you'll hear all about that in this fascinating interview with David. So after several minutes of interest and casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject that was the early formative years. It's a classic. David, it's over to you.
Well, first of all, I grew up in a house. My dad was in the army, so I grew up in a house where there was no music. Essentially, the only records we had at home were military marching bands.
Right.
So I would say I was born in '67. So I would say my musical awakening was probably two-tone.
Right.
So, yeah. So I mean, a lot of kids listen to the dregs of kind of the dead end of punk. So people would, but for me, the thing that really excited me would have been two-tone. I would think when I was about 13 or something like that. That was what really caught my ear.
Yes, I would imagine Baggy Trousers by Madness was probably one of those songs.
Yeah. It was like them and the two-tone and the Jam. They were probably the equivalent of Oasis in the 90s or something like that, I would guess.
Yes.
If everybody liked them, kind of thing. Yeah.
It was quite strange, actually. And where did you, I mean, as you're probably the military, you might have moved around a lot, but where was your kind of formative years? Where did you grow up?
So my dad left the army, and I grew up in the northeast near Middlesbrough.
Right, there you go. And did you have any, brothers and sisters or friends that kind of turned you on to any music?
No, I mean, I had a brother but he's much older. He was 12 years older than me, and he joined the army straight from school. So he left home when I was 4 or 5. So I didn't really get anything from him. I would say, thinking back, I was probably the person that got my friends into music, really, rather than the other way around. I would think I was the one that was really going out and looking for new things and playing them to my friends.
Yes. And then during your teen period, obviously this is where you mentioned, well, I mentioned Madness, you mentioned the Jam. And then did you, during that 80s period, did you what was your first gig you went to and first single you bought?
The first single I bought as a child would have been Pop Music by M. But I think the first single I bought as like a teenager who was really getting into music quite possibly could have been Gangsters by the Specials, I would think. Right. And the first gig I went to was Stiff Little Fingers.
God, that's very cool. That's nice, isn't it? And did you start sort of finding yourself being drawn into any musical tribe at that stage in the sort of the mid-80s when you were probably hitting 15, 16?
To think, by the time I was getting to 15, 16, I was very much looking up to the kids who were 18, who were older than me, and they were all quite gothy. So they were all into The Cure and Susie and the Banshees and Killing Joke and people like that. So that's probably where and that's kind of where I got drawn as I got a bit older, I would think.
Right. Yes, The Mission and the Cult and.
Not the Mission, but then the Cult a little bit. The Mission were kind of a joke band, I think, to us at that time. But maybe the Cult, I suppose. Yeah, I saw the Cult a few times when I was that kind of age, probably.
Yes, well, I don't know. They were. I must admit, I was very indie related, and at the time, I didn't take goth that seriously. I wished I'd been less uptight when I was growing up, because I think there was probably a lot of good music that I wouldn't sort of engage with because it's like, no, that's not my scene. Like, I suppose electronic music as well was a little bit like that with, those bands like Depeche Mode. But now I look back, oh yes, actually that would have been quite good to have engaged a bit more.
Yeah, I think you look back with hindsight and you're like, well, why didn't I like that in 1987? That was brilliant, but just wasn't on your radar. Sometimes you can't beat yourself up about those kind of things. Sometimes things just pass you by.
Yes, I know. And it wasn't like you could have an excuse going, yes, but the gigs cost hundreds. Like, no, it was only £2 to go and see.
Exactly. Yeah.
It was even more annoying, really.
Yeah.
But then was guitar your instrument, by the way? Were you a guitarist?
In the Exuberants, I was. When I lived in the north, before I moved to Manchester, I used to play the bass, and then I switched to guitar when I moved to Manchester. Um, just basically because I didn't want to be a bass player anymore. I wanted to be the center of attention. Well, I wanted to be nearly the center of attention.
Yes. What was your guitar kind of heroes, role models at this stage?
So when I went to Manchester, I was 18. So it would have been Johnny Marr from the Smiths, probably number one. Will Sargent from Echo and the Bunnymen would have been another. The two guys out of the Chameleons.
Genius.
Yeah, that was where I was coming from really. By the time I was 18 and I moved to Manchester, that's where I was.
So did you do, when you hit 16? Did you do 2 years of A levels?
Yes, yeah.
And then you went, right, prospectus. There's one place in the country that I want to go to.
To be fair, I also applied to get. I wanted to get anywhere that wasn't. I wanted to go anywhere that wasn't where I was living. So I applied to go to London as well. Like Manchester is where I ended up. So.
Right. What did you study there?
Politics.
Classic. These are great, and you get a grant. You get.
Yes, yeah. I spent the whole of my first term grant on a Gretsch guitar that was basically the cost of the whole of my grant. So
yes, it's a wise decision, and it's amazing, isn't it? Looking back on that, were you kind of aware both of the Manchester scene, but those kind of areas in Manchester that have now become quite famous, like the Hume sort of estate that lots of anarchists and outsiders and squatters lived, or were you in halls of residence at that stage?
I was never in halls of residence. The first place I lived in Manchester was a shared house in a place called Clayton Bridge, which is kind of on the way to Droylsden. It was just in the middle of nowhere. And I was probably stayed there about 2 months before I moved to, I think I moved to Didsbury actually. Well, I've got a bed sit in Didsbury Village and stuff for £20 a week. And I was aware then of stuff like when I lived in Didsbury, I was obviously very aware of that's where Factory had been based and stuff. I don't think I was really aware of Hume and probably until I'd been there about a year. And I had a friend who lived in the Red Bricks, just in Hume.
Right. Was your first year consumed with going to gigs and seeing bands?
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I didn't really go to university. I went to university because I wanted to be in a band, and I used university as the excuse to leave home essentially.
Yes,
so
I think most people I spoke to have had the same. There was no interest in the course and no interest in the career. It was just literally, it was a good music scene. I wanted to be in a band. And
yeah, exactly. I mean, my first year I probably actually did go to most classes and lectures, but second and third year I was never there ever, really.
Right. And what was your first musical band, or was it the Exuberants?
No, I was in bands in Middlesbrough. I was in let me think. When I was about 15, 16, I was in a band, like a gothy band who probably aspired to be Theatre of Hate.
Right.
And then I was in a band that were a bit better when I was 17, who were called Indian Summer, and they probably aspired to be U2, to be honest, I would think. And then I moved to Manchester, and then I became a guitarist, and then I probably, when I first started playing the guitar, I probably aspired to be the Chameleons or Lloyd Cole and the Commotions, I would think, something like that, maybe.
Right, there you go. And it was quite interesting. I remember a few years ago listening to, I think Alexis Sell has got a podcast, and he was talking to the woman who co-wrote the Young Ones, and she'd been in Manchester, and I think that's where she met Rick Mail and then Ben Elton, and so Manchester's got quite an interesting history of sort of both comedy, theatre, music, performance. I mean, was it quite a vibrant time when you were there?
Yeah. I mean, when I remember when I moved into my bedsit in Didsbury, the landlord was like, "Oh, Ben Elton used to live here, and Selena Scott used to live here." It's like he just basically reeled off of like 20 people. I was like, "Oh my God, all these people are world famous," kind of thing. And then they've all lived in this grotty bedsit in Didsbury Village. So yeah, I was very aware of that. Yeah, it's a
Right.
very vibrant place. Yeah.
And that music scene, I mean, the indie scene for me kind of really starts. I mean, there was that period where you had bands like U2 and Julian Cope and Echo. But then when the Smiths hit in '83, there felt like a new chapter for me anyway. And then for 5 years, I liked, a lot of stuff that John Peel was playing and was obsessed with all those bands, as well as people like Gregory Isaacs and the Bundu Boys. But when the Smiths finished in '87, it felt like that was the end of that, and yeah, in hindsight, you kind of think, yeah, that was quite enough of that. But then, that world of ecstasy and dance music came along. Were you you were at that time, must have been kind of seeing how that was changing, in terms of.
Yeah, I think actually that kind of when that happened, because we were managed at the time, we were managed by Dave Haslam, who obviously was a Hacienda DJ. And in kind of 1990, obviously that was the year of Manchester. Really, that was when the Stone Roses debut album came out, and that's when the Happy Mondays were really huge. And it almost felt like it happened overnight that all of a sudden, Manchester bands weren't about introspection and staring at your feet and playing the guitar. They were about going out and dancing and taking ecstasy. And we at that time we were just like, it's not really for us. And I really, looking back now, I really almost felt like overnight we were like, we're kind of irrelevant really now. We just, we're not going to be, the Mock Turtles or something like that. We just, we really did feel like we were just kind of waving everybody goodbye kind of thing almost.
But it was strange because there was like the Sarah record label, which kept, that kind of slightly introverted kind of quality of music, sensitive, people not particularly fashionable in that kind of mainstream. But there was all those other bands that had started to come along, like I suppose My Bloody Valentine and Silverfish and the Faith Healers. So, and I suppose the early years of Carter. And, so it was a little bit of I don't know, guitar-based stuff, but it was definitely not sort of dance-driven. And then you had the Seattle scene coming out in sort of '89, and there was that album Bleach that I thought was good, and then seeing Nirvana at the Norwich Arts Centre supporting Tad and thinking, oh, yes, I quite like the grunge scene. It's all very exciting. But yes, for a musician, because I spoke to people from like the Primitives and my Mighty Lemon Drops, and they were thinking, yes, I think our audience, there isn't much of an audience here. No one really wants the next album that we're about to launch, and they couldn't get arrested really. And even their fans weren't even interested. So that was like, I think we should call it a day. So it must be quite difficult for an artist and a band to navigate when there's a real change. Sort of
yeah, definitely. I mean, and also at that time, obviously you had the Sundays as well, they just got magically appeared. They just appeared out of absolutely nowhere.
Yes.
And became this huge. It became the huge kind of Smiths influence kind. The kind of the band that everyone was like, oh, they've carried on the legacy of the Smiths, I guess you could say at the time. But I remember at the time we really did struggle with the whole kind of dance floor kind of experimentation of a lot of people, because even people like James, I think, kind of started using like drum loops and like kind of almost house pianos and stuff like that. It was everywhere really. You couldn't escape it.
Yes, and they had that big single, didn't they? Sit Down, which managed to keep them going a bit longer. I mean, yeah, because they'd been knocking around for quite a bit of the '80s, really, which was quite interesting.
Yeah,
so
they were the
I was going to say, what was this sort of, how did the band form, by the way?
So Muffin, the singer, she had an advert up in like a just a little tiny little written note, which was she'd put up in the notice board in Affleck's Palace, which is a Manchester kind of I guess they would say they're an alternative shopping centre. It's just lots of secondhand clothes and art and stuff like that. Then they have it's three floors and they have notice boards as you go up each floor. And she just had a little note saying she was looking for a guitarist. So that's how me and Muffin got together. Then I think we probably did another ad for a bassist and a drummer. Found Stefan, who was the bassist, and then Johnny, who was the drummer, and was a friend of Stefan's. So it was Muffin, and then I met Muffin, and then we got 6 months later, probably Stefan got involved. And
were you all students in Manchester?
Muffin had come from America. She was studying cello at the Royal Northern College of Music. Stefan and Johnny, they were both locals.
Right.
Yeah.
And was Muffin? Is this true that she's the sister of John Spencer?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Right. My God, that's exciting. Yes, I went through quite a blues explosion during the 90s. And so was she kind of musically, was she looking for an indie pop band to be part of?
Yes, she was nothing like, I mean, I knew John I spent quite a lot of time with John because we'd go to America and he was very accommodating and let me stay with him in New York and stuff like that. But Muffin didn't want to be anything like John. I don't think he'd forged his own path, and she was very much an Anglophile really, whereas John was obviously very much rooted in kind of the kind of American kind of Iggy Pop kind of Ramones kind of punk kind of thing really. So Muffin was an Anglophile. She loved English music, British music.
Right, there you go. God, that must have been it must be quite an exciting, when you look back, did it feel quite a sort of a romantic, I'm not saying romantic in that way, but, just bands forming in this kind of very organic way and kind of...
Yeah, it was. I mean, it seemed easy at the time. Really, it took us. I mean, it was a bit of a struggle to get a good drummer, but it just felt like everybody was in a band, and you just bumped into someone in the street, and it just really did feel like everybody was on the same page and doing more or less the same thing. And you'd go to the boardwalk and you'd see your friends play, and then the next week you'd be playing, and your friends would turn up, kind of thing. Yeah, it was good. It was a good time.
Yes. So was this kind of 88, 89 that the band started?
So I would have met Muffin. I think I moved to Manchester in 86. So I'm saying I probably met Muffin in 87. And then we would have really got going by the end of 87, I would think. So it was 87 to 90 where we were really where we were doing well, and there was a lot of interest, I think. Yeah.
Yes. So when did you go in? What was the first recording session you did?
The first recording session would have been Out of the Blue, which was a recording studio which was in Ancoats, which then became the sub studio who did that big hit Ain't Nobody Ain't No Use. And the two of the songs from that original recording studio are the two songs that are on the Hand to Mouth compilation, Dave Haslam had a record label called Play Hard, and he put a compilation out called Hand to Mouth, and two of the songs that from our first demo were on that compilation, which was Bedside Appeal and Yeah and Yeah and Yeah and Yeah.
Blimey, yeah. So this has got all those people like Kings of Slums.
Hit and the Bodines, yeah.
Yes, and obviously MC Busby, which...
Yes, yeah.
And the Bodines as well. So when did Dave find you? Did you find him?
You know what? I don't know. When we first started, when we did that first demo, and it was in the days where you just get 100 cassettes copied, and you just give them to anybody you could think of. I think we got a lot of pressing, like the local Manchester paper called the Manchester Evening News, and there were like some local publications that quite liked us. I think there was a journalist called Stephen Kingston who really liked us and wrote about us in quite a few different places. And I'm guessing that's how I think Dave Haslam found us. But how it came about, I honestly can't remember anymore.
Right, because he was quite on the scene. There was, like, I mean, there'd been that Courtney Love kind of moment in Manchester, wasn't there, where she'd sort of come looking for Manchester. And I think he sort of wrote about that in one of his books. And I think Paul Simpson from the Wild Swans did as well, didn't he? Some of these kind of interesting stories. And then there's this, like, on your Facebook page, not yours, but the band's Facebook page, there's this little bit on Dave's diary entry in 1989, March the 14th, where you were playing the Astoria, London.
Yes, so that would have been. I do remember that actually. So that was Happy Mondays. They were headlining, and it must have been. They must have been touring Bummed, I would think then. And the train set were the band who were on Play Hard. They were second, and then we opened up. I do remember that. That was good. That was a good night. I think we got lost on the way, and we arrived literally 10 minutes before we had to go on stage. I think we got stuck in really, really bad traffic in the north of London, and they weren't even. I think they weren't even going to let us play, and we just kind of barged our way on and played. So we did nearly miss it. I think we took a wrong turn in somewhere when we came off the M1, and yeah, nearly missed it.
Yes, and there's quite a few of these entries, aren't there? It's sort of the Boardwalk, which was that the kind of the main place for sort of up and coming bands at this time?
Yeah, so Dave Haslam DJ'd. He DJ'd at the Boardwalk on a Friday and a Saturday, but they put a lot of independent Manchester bands on during the week and also earlier on in the evening before clubs and stuff. So yeah, with our first ever gig was at the Boardwalk, which I think was supporting. Don't know if you know Gaylan Dorsey. I think she's the bass player in the Rolling Stones now, actually.
Oh, so she played with Bowie, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. Yeah. So that was our first ever gig, and she played supporting her. And I would say I think I would be generous saying there were 10 people there when she played. It was a very underattended gig. So, but that was our first gig. We played at the Boardwalk, probably more than we played anywhere else, I would think.
Yes, and I guess then did you cross paths with the man from Del Monte, because this was their period as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, we played with them. In fact, we shared a rehearsal room with them for probably about a year, and we played with them 5 times, 6 times, maybe. They in Manchester at that time. In fact, probably even in the northwest at that time, they were massive. They were playing to 1,000, maybe 2,000 people in some cases. And we supported them quite a few times. Got on with them quite well, and like I say, shared a rehearsal room with them for a while in like a derelict mill in the middle of nowhere in East Manchester.
Yes, and I noticed that I was just reading this article that Stuart Maconie had written. I think that was at the NME, where there was quite a feature about the band at this time.
Yes,
so did you have much interest in record labels that coming to see you or trying to sign you?
Something. I think Phonogram. There was a guy called Adrian Thrills who had been an journalist. He was A&R at Phonogram. They paid for us to go into the studio. I think a bit later on, Nude, who obviously were Suede.
Oh yes,
great label. Yeah, they showed quite a lot of interest. But beyond, we got plenty. Rough Trade. I think we spoke to Jeff Travis at Rough Trade a couple of times as well. But nothing. Phonogram were the only. I think Phonogram were the only record label that actually paid for us to go into the studio. And I think the 2 songs we did, they just. I think they said they need choruses. I think is what they said at the end. I think.
They're very stylized, the band, aren't they? I'm sort of looking at your photographs, and your sort of the image. You know, you've really got that kind of slightly chic French vibe about you, haven't you?
we were me and Muffin if we were almost but we were very hardline about it. We had to look good. I think, you know, we were really, you know, it doesn't matter. We was like, if you're gonna, if you know, if the starting point is you've got to look good, sounding good kind of comes a little bit after that. Really, I think we were a bit obsessed with that. I think at the time.
Yes. Well, it's quite amazing, actually. Yes, it must blow your mind seeing these pictures and these articles.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, especially the TV appearance. I haven't seen that since 1990. So when I went, I literally saw it. I saw it like 2 days ago, and I was like, "Where's this? Where has this come from?" Kind of thing. I just basically sent it to all my friends and just said, "Look at this is me when I was young and handsome and good looking."
And then
I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's not. I mean,
and saying things. Oh, that was probably 25 years ago, and then thinking.
35, 30.
And then you get to an age where you start counting decades with your hand because you think everything's like 20 years ago, and you think, actually, no, that was 40 years ago, something.
Yeah.
You have to sit down and contemplate life and what's happened.
Yes,
but yes,
exactly.
It's strange. So then how did your next kind of, you know, you've got the single and you've had this gig and the, you know, the reviews are coming in. What's the next move with the band?
So the single came out on Play Hard, and it did well actually. I think it sold out. I think I don't know how many were pressed. Probably not more than 1,000 or 2,000, and it sold out. But in the meantime, the whole Manchester thing took off, and the Stone Roses album came out, and the Happy Mondays, and then people like Inspiral Carpets and Northside and even someone like the Mock Turtles or something like that. Everyone kind of embraced baggy, didn't they? I guess.
Yes, I mean, I remember going to Glastonbury and seeing very impractical baggy clothes around campfires.
And I think that kind of threw us a little bit. And Play Hard, Dave Haslam's label, I think the MC Busby had recorded an album which they'd paid for, and something happened where they basically refused to let Play Hard release it, and they signed it to a major, which meant Dave lost a lot of money, and he basically said, "That's it, I can't afford to put any more records out." I think we just struggled then for probably about a couple of years, maybe. We didn't kind of jump on the baggy scene and kept on doing what we were doing. And then probably after about 2 years, that's when we signed the mini album to Native.
Yes.
Native. Yeah. But when that actually came out, it didn't really do anything at all. Really, I don't think nothing happened with it. Really, just kind of disappeared into the ether.
God, what a shame! Because you would have probably been just perfect for that Britpop moment, wouldn't you?
Yeah. But then in 90, that kind of, we probably carried on for another year after that, and I left, and then the band did some rearranging and turned into Brassy, and they became they actually did quite well. They released a couple of albums on Ouija and played Glastonbury, and went on tours and played America and everything. They were a much better band, and they wrote much better songs without me being in them. So make of that what you will. So.
God, but did you enjoy the EP Led the Way?
My main, I guess, now I look back on it, I wish I'd enjoyed being in the band more at the time. I think I was so obsessed with wanting to be big, and we used to get really upset when things didn't go to plan. I think in hindsight, looking back, things didn't go to plan because we weren't really a great band, So my biggest regret is that I just didn't enjoy it for what it was at the time. Just playing and playing, traveling up and down the country and playing gigs. I should have just enjoyed that more for what it was, rather than constantly looking for what was next, I think, really.
Yes. And did you get to play outside Manchester quite a bit?
Yeah, we played in London quite a bit. Obviously, we played at like the Camden Falcon and all those like the Limelight. We played lots of all those kind of lots of iconic London venues, and we played in Leeds and Bradford, and we even played. We went up to Scotland to play and stuff like that. So we played quite a lot round and about.
Yes, my God. So can you remember when the band is that a process that you all sit down and say, we're going to call it a day now?
It was more like an argument, I would say. That's probably the best way to describe it. I think actually when Bernard Butler left Suede, and they basically advertised, they just went out in the NME and said, we need a new guitarist, just send us your demos or whatever. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to send Suede I'm going to send a Suede a demo. And that really annoyed, as you would expect, really annoyed everybody else in the band. And that was it wasn't a discussion. I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to leave the band, and they were glad to see me go, I think, at the time.
Oh no!
And like I said, I think they changed the name almost immediately, and within a year we'd probably doing much better, to be honest. Yeah.
Blimey, Brassy happened. I didn't really come across Brassy much, actually, in all honesty. But I'll have to check out. Have you got any plans of? Does anybody have the master tapes of your recordings?
No. So I kept in, like, even though after about a year, after a couple of years, maybe you've kind of not necessarily antagonism, just kind of staying out of each other's ways. We started talking and being friends again. And I kept in touch with Muffin until probably about 10 years ago, maybe. She'd moved back to America. She was living in New York. And when do you remember Hurricane Katrina?
Yes.
So that, even though that was mostly New Orleans and stuff, it caused a massive tidal surge up up the rivers in New York, which flooded her basement, and that's where all of the master tapes were. So, or everything that was kind of Exuberance related, even some of the musical equipment and stuff was destroyed by that flood. So,
oh my God.
Yeah, so that would have been what, 2010 maybe, I think, something like that.
God, so it will never see the light of day, will it?
No. I mean, no. I mean, there was some stuff. I was hoping actually when I saw that your friend had uploaded demos, I was like, oh, I wonder if he's uploaded this and this, and he hasn't. And I think, oh, they must be gone. You know, I haven't got them anymore. I can't imagine anybody else has. So
yes. Did Muffin keep on in the music world, or did she?
So she moved back to her and Johnny, who was the drummer, got married, and they moved to New York. And I think they Brassy continued in America with an American drummer and an American bass player, but not, you know, they gave up quite quickly. And then Muffin had 2 kids. They had twins. And that was it. And then I lost touch with her probably about the time the kids were 2 or 3, and I think someone told me that she'd left New York and they were living in the Midwest somewhere. But like I say, I've not heard from her for 15 years. So.
Yes, and what then happens with you in the 90s after your musical moment? Did you sort of continue on in that journey, or did you?
No, I embraced the dance floor and started DJing.
Right. So you became. And where was this? At the Hacienda?
No, everywhere. Everywhere. I played everywhere. I wasn't a successful, well-known DJ, but I made a living from DJing up until maybe 10 years ago, and I worked in a record. There's a record shop in Manchester called Piccadilly Records.
Right.
I worked there for quite a long time as well.
And did you go by another name, or were you?
No, just same name.
And what was your sort of musical path on the dance floor?
I was really won over by house music in the early 90s, and then as I got older, probably more disco and stuff like that, I guess.
Right, my God, that's it does happen, doesn't it? And did you keep your guitar at this stage, or had you?
The guitars I left with the band, and I think all of them, or most of them, were lost in the flood with the master tapes, I think.
Yes, my God,
Yeah,
that's
which is a shame because there were some very, very good guitars in there, really. But there you go.
blimey, the story of a band. It's just, oh, it's such a shame that because it's quite nice. There's various people who seem to be very keen on sort of, I don't know, releasing John Peel sessions. A guy who does, a guy called Nick. He's got a label he started about 3 years ago called the Precious Recordings of London, and he's been sort of, I don't know, labour of love, really, sort of releasing
Yeah.
stuff. And Cherry Red Records are always kind of bringing stuff out. So have you had any material kind of on other compilations at all?
No, to the best of my knowledge, there was a couple of tracks on the Hand to Mouth Play Hard compilation. Then there was a track on a 7-inch flexi disc that came out with a magazine called Debris, which was
Yes.
Dave Asm's fanzine. And then there was the single on Play Hard, which was Yeah and Yeah and Yeah and Yeah. And then there was then there was just the native thing, which I can't even remember what it's called. The CD.
Oh,
Yeah, the
Led the
EP.
Way.
Led the Way, yeah. There's that, and that's it. There was loads and loads of the demos, but I certainly haven't got any of them. Whether anybody else has, I wouldn't know. So
No, well, you never know with a bit of
yeah. Well, I
interest
mean,
on.
I was when I listened to the stuff that Danny had uploaded to YouTube, I was like, I don't remember recording that. So um, so I'm sure there's probably other stuff around, but like I say, I couldn't remember it. He's uploaded 2 lots of demos, and I really don't remember that at all. So who's to say how much else is out there, really?
Yeah, I mean, there was a band in Manchester called Easterhouse, and I remember doing an interview with the guitarist, and I think somebody had got the album and had remastered it, and with technology that it is now, has managed to make another recording and made it a bit nicer. So it'd be interesting to see if anybody gets any of your, the releases that you've done and do various little things with it. Because
yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear it. To be honest, I think I would. I never thought that we recorded stuff especially well. So if somebody finds it and does a better job, I'd love to hear it.
Yes. And what happened to Stefan?
He was in Brassy, and when Brassy started, he moved to guitar, and they got a girl called Karen in to play bass, and I think him and Karen got married, and they lived in London. But I've literally not seen Stefan or even heard from him for 20 years. So.
My God, it's quite like the Fleetwood Mac story of this band, isn't it?
yeah. Lots of love interest.
And did Johnny come back to the UK or stay in America?
No, as far as I'm aware, he's still in the US. Yeah.
Right. My God, it'll be interesting if with any of this interest that yes, you'll get the odd message from other members. Sort of.
Well, I mean, there's stuff on Spotify, and the Led the Way EP is up on Spotify, and I didn't put it there. So, and I'm pretty sure that Muffin wouldn't have put it there. So I imagine if she saw it on there, she would probably message me and say, "Why have you put this up on Spotify?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, I thought you had." So.
Yes, I know. Occasionally people do that, and then they go. Some member of the band go, "Do we get royalties?" And it's like, "Mate, we'll never get royalties. It's not going to be that big. Don't worry about the royalties."
There's no royalties. So I think actually it must be so. Kevin, who had a record label called Native at the time, I think he must now be under the Cherry Red umbrella.
Right.
It's probably him. That's because there was a track on a compilation, wasn't there, recently called C92?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm guessing. Again, I didn't know about until about 2 days ago, so I'm guessing that's probably him that's done that.
Right, of course. So yes, you got 82 plays on Spotify at the moment. It's all here, isn't it? God, that's just very exciting. Yes, you're on C1890. So you probably got quite a lot of plays on that compilation, actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
But like I said, I didn't know anything about it. Literally didn't know anything about it. Literally probably like 2 days ago.
You must have thought, Jesus, why does someone want to talk to me about this indie band, for God's sake? There's very little interest.
Yeah. One of my friends was like, "Oh, it's probably because of that Cherry Red comp," and I was like, Hot Cherry Red comp. So there you go. There you go.
Well, to be honest, the one thing I found was that the more obscure the band, the more interest there is, because most people have had their story, like the famous, like the Oasis, Blur. You don't really need to hear that story, or Bono. But when it's an obscure band, people go, "My God, I love that band. That was the band that saw me through university for 2 years. I saw them 20 times, and I've got their records." And and it's funny how people stumble across these things and find it interesting, because you're also on this. There's a guy who does a blog, and he did a little bit of a record label in New York called Cloudberry. Did you come across that article?
Yeah.
Because that's where the other bit of information about the band I've got from. I'll send you the link anyway.
Okay.
So he wrote this little bit about the band as well. And bizarrely, I mean, he's such an indie fan. I even interviewed him that he came over from New York to Manchester just to see the man from Del Monte.
Oh, really? Okay.
I know. I just thought, God, you are a super fan. He's so young, but yes, it was quite good. So, were your recordings then? He's got here. The producer was Nick Garside. Was this true?
That's right. Yeah, that's right, Nick. Yeah. He owned Out of the Blue Studios with his partner. His partner was called Adam Lesser, and it was just off. I mean, it's actually now being really redeveloped. It's now like quite a nice part of Manchester. It's just this little square. It's called Cutting Room Square. It's really vibrant. At the time, in the 80s, it was derelict essentially. It's actually quite a nice part of Manchester now. And yeah, it was just like a little tiny studio, and then like the second or third floor of like an old mill. It must have been at the time. Yeah.
Right. And on here it says that Morrissey had sort of listed you in his top 10 bands. Is this true?
It did, yeah. I forgot about that. In the NME, so it must have been either as the Smiths were splitting up, or maybe around the time that Viva Hate was coming out, I guess. He'd done a list of his top 10 Manchester bands, and I think we were number 9 or something like that in the NME. I think it was. I don't know. At the time, I remember I thought maybe he was just doing it as like because we did sound quite a lot like the Smiths sometimes. Maybe it was just like a bit. He was just taking the piss a little bit. Maybe, I don't know. But I didn't know anything about that until one of my friends around me was saying, "Have you seen the NME? Have you seen the NME?"
Yes, well, on this little, I'll send you the link, but he's put a link to the track "Delicate Cool." So,
oh yeah, oh, that was one of the B-sides to Yeah, I think, yeah.
Right, so there you go. So yes, I mean, people do track you down, don't they? So,
I mean, fair play.
Well, great. Well, thank you ever so much for your time. I'm just, I'm glad you didn't think I was too much of a nutcase when asking.
It made a lot more sense. Like I say, you sent me the message, and I was like, this doesn't make any sense. So then I just literally sat in front of my computer and typed the Exuberant into Google, and I was just like, I wish someone could have taken a photograph of my face. I was like lent in. I was like, what? See all this stuff that just magically appeared out of nowhere. So.
Yes, well, look, thank you ever so much for your time, and and I'll probably put the link to the interview or send it to the Facebook page, and yes, they'll be amused. But yeah, I'll send you the link to the Cloudberry one as well, because it's quite nice, and you can see a few bits. But anyway, look, have a lovely evening, and thank you for your time, and really appreciate this. This is great. So
thank you.
Go. Take care.
All right.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye. And that, dear listener, is the end of the interview. A massive thank you to David Walker for that stroll through memory lane and the time of being in the Exuberants in a Manchester-based band. And I will put various links to bits and pieces. But there is a Facebook page as well to join and hear some more information or see some more information. And this is the C86 show. If you want to contact me, you can. Just look at all those social media platform sites, do C86 show. And all these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes and Podbean. Check them out. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.